If you're roasting coffee at home and you have experienced kind of an ashy note in your coffee and you want to clean that up, I've got 5 tips that might help, so stick around. Thank you for joining me today and welcome to the Virtual Coffee Lab. You may have noticed that you're roasting coffee and you're getting a lot of great results, but that there's this underlying ashiness that you're not quite sure about and you're not sure how to get rid of it. I've had quite a few people reach out to me and ask that question, how do I get rid of an ashy note in my coffee? And just one recently, which I provided some answers for. And so I thought I'd share them here with you today. I've got 5, and there may be more than that. So if I've missed something or if you want to add to that list, then feel free to leave your comments in this video below, and that would be awesome. Anything that can help home roasters improve their skills is always welcome here at the Virtual Coffee Lab. All right, the first reason that I've identified could be that you are pushing the coffee too far and you've got these roasty notes, this dark side of the coffee, which you really don't want. You may have gone too far into the roasting process where you are starting to carbonize the coffee bean itself, and you don't want to do that. So you're going to need to make some adjustments. Currently, most coffee roasters are using their senses to determine how far to take their coffee into the roast. And some of us also have logging software to help monitor what's happening with the roast itself, times, temperatures, events, and so on. And you have the ability to have a very accurate reading of temperatures with probes. So if you have that ability, you may want to knock your coffee back a couple of degrees where you normally would take it into the roasting process. What do I mean by that? Well, while we're roasting coffee, we're applying heat to the beans. That temperature is penetrating the bean. The temperatures in the roasting environment are going up. The bean temperature is going up. We get past first crack and the roasting process is continuing, and we have to decide when the coffee leaves the roaster. It's at that point what I'm talking about. We use our senses. We use our sight, our smell. We're listening to the coffee, and we are also looking at temperatures. And so you will want to have your roast end a little sooner than you normally do. The second reason why your coffee may have an ashy note to it is because you're not cooling your coffee quick enough. The Bmore is notorious for this, and some air roasters are notorious for this. It's difficult to get the coffee out of the roasting chamber quickly enough to cool the coffee. It's really important that we do that, or we're going to have to compensate and know that the coffee is going to continue to roast even though we've hit this cooling cycle or even though we've stopped the heat. This coffee is going to continue to roast until we can get it to cool down. So if you have a Bmore, anticipate on ending your roast a little early. The last video I just did, roasting, it was the Bmore roasting recipe video. I ended my roast early. I hit the cooling cycle, and so when I calculated my time to when I hit cool end or cooling, I only had a 13% development time for that third phase. But if I added in how long it took for that coffee to cool down to the point where it wasn't roasting anymore, then it was probably more like a 15% development time. You could easily add a couple percent of development onto your roast, depending upon how long that coffee is going to sit there before it gets cool enough. What's the temperature of a coffee to be cool enough not to be roasting anymore? I have no idea. But I want to cool my coffee down at least 100 degrees. I'd feel really good if I could get it down to 250 degrees, 260 degrees before I would say, yeah, the coffee's cool enough where it's not roasting. I don't have any data to back that point up, but to me, I know that on some roasters, that coffee is going to continue to roast. It's going to take it further into the roasting process than you wanted, and you're going to get an ashy note, potentially, that you weren't planning on. So get that coffee cool quickly, get it out of the roaster quickly. You may want to use some sort of a basket or something that you can put the coffee in and then put a fan to it to get that coffee to cool down as quick as possible. All right, the third reason that we may experience a roasty note or a ashy note in our coffee is if we're roasting a coffee that has mucilage that's still attached. There's honey processed and some natural coffees that have a little bit of the coffee flesh still attached to them because of the processing that they experienced or that they went through. It's not a washed coffee, and so we still have a little bit of this fruit that's left, or the membrane that is attached to the coffee, and that goes into the roaster and it actually gets a little charred. I've got a picture here that kind of describes that. You'll see that in the center line of the bean, you'll notice how there's this very dark char that's there, and those notes can get into the cup. And so if you're roasting a coffee like that, if it's a natural or a honey processed coffee where we have this mucilage that's still attached and it gets charred, then that's a pretty obvious reason where you could be sensing some of those charred notes or those ashy notes that you're experiencing. How do we get rid of those? Well, that is kind of a problem. I think we need to be a little more gentle on our heat. We may need to go a little lighter on the roast, and that may help, but that's a difficult one. Again, the picture that I just showed you here, that coffee went a little darker than I would normally have taken it. So it's kind of a fine line, and you're just going to have to kind of figure that out and play with it. But probably a little bit shorter roast time, lower temperature may be the best approach for that coffee. All right, the fourth reason we may have experienced ashy notes in our coffee is because we may have created roasting defects while we're roasting our coffee. I've got an entire video on roasting defects. You can check that out up here in the corner. Also, my playlist on roasting essentials is there, and that also is going to help you reduce the potential creation of roasting defects by learning and understanding what is happening with that coffee. The short version of that story is that you're applying too much heat to the bean, and the dry phase itself is extremely short, and so these beans go into this roasting environment. They're exposed to this really intense heat, and some crazy things happen. We have like 3 roasting defects that I can identify just off the top of my head. One is blistering or chipping or divoting, and that is where the heat is so intense that the outer portion of the seed actually blisters, and so it creates these little divots, these little craters in the coffee, and that is a sign that you need to be a little more gentle on your heat. The other roasting defect is tipping. Tipping is a defect that happens from too much heat application to the beans, and the heat actually blows out the ends of the bean. If you look at the tips of the bean and you see these black marks, it looks like you used the bean as a flamethrower, or it was like a volcano. That is really intense heat escaping out the ends of that bean, and it creates those dark charred ends. That's called tipping, and that can be tasted in the cup. The craters, maybe not as far as ashiness goes. The tipping, you'll definitely taste in the cup. The other roasting defect is scorching. That's where the metal, hot metal from the drum wall, or whatever contact of your roasting device to the bean, where the bean hasn't been moving around, it gets burned, and you'll see these dark marks on the bean, and that is scorching, and you will taste that in your cup as well. That will give you that ashy, darker note that you are trying to eliminate. So roasting defects is probably one of the biggest reasons you'll experience these ashy notes, and it's something that you'll need to adjust in your dry phase. If you're not sure what I'm talking about as far as the dry phase goes, or the 3 phases of roasting coffee and what happens in each phase, my essential coffee list playlist up in the corner is going to help you out with that. But roasting defects is probably the biggie that's there. The 5th reason you may be experiencing an ashy note in your coffee is because your flavors are kind of muted, and so the ashy note is more prevalent. You're able to detect it easier. So if you are able to roast your coffee and maximize its flavor, there's a good chance you'll be able to mask that ashy note or get rid of it through some of the other changes we talk about. And that includes, in part of this fifth point of addressing the ashiness and being able to detect it, is because our coffee is flat, it's boring, it's not really developed from a flavor standpoint, and it always seems to taste the same. If that's the case for you, then I would encourage you to listen to this very carefully. You can change that. You can roast coffee on just about any device. I have a follower of this channel who roasts coffee in a toaster oven. He's figured out a way to get rid of roasting defects. He has been able to roast in a toaster oven with a roasting profile that maximizes flavor. And so that's what this channel is all about, regardless of the roasting device you have, whether it's a Beemore, whether it's a drum roaster here, or whether it's a frying pan or a toaster oven or whatever device you're using. You have the opportunity to roast some really, really good coffee, but you're not going to be able to do that unless you understand what's happening to the bean when it's being exposed to the heat and how you should be able to control this roasting process through each of the phases. That is going to allow you to craft some great tasting coffee. My playlist up here on the coffee roasting essentials is really what you need to start with. That is going to introduce the concept of the 3 phases of coffee roasting and how each phase influences your roast and how you can roast some great coffee. I'm not trying to criticize somebody if they're not using the methodology that I'm promoting here. I'm just trying to help you roast some great coffee. There are other ways to do that. There are other means to get there that other people might be promoting. And if that's working for you, or if you tend to agree with that, and that's working for you, then continue to do it. That's great. But if you're trying to figure this out and you're looking for answers, I would encourage you to watch the Essentials playlist. If you have a Beemore, watch my last roast that I just did. I think it's the Beemore roasting recipe is the name of the video. If you're roasting on a hot air roaster or a frying pan or some of these other devices, the Essentials playlist still applies to you. You don't have to have a fancy roaster. You don't have to have logging software, but what you do need to do is you need to chart your temperatures, write down your temperatures, write down your times, the events, all of that, and it's shared in these videos. And even if you watch especially my last video that I did with the Beemore, you'll see me write down on a brown piece of craft paper my times and my temperatures, and I show you how I figure out what's happening to my roast and how I might change it. I hope that's been helpful for you guys. There may be other points than the 5 that I mentioned for this ashy note in coffee, and I'd love for you to be able to share those in the comments. If you have questions about what I've said, please ask those as well. And if you've got anything that you want to share with your experience with the ashy note that might help other people, please share that in the comments. I would really appreciate it. All right, well, thank you for joining me today. I appreciate you being here and watching my video, and I hope you have a great week roasting. See you next time.